Welcome to Slash Forward. Before we begin, I wanted to do a pre-video reminder that my website is now engorged with merch, so check it out. This week, we're going to round out our stable of horror westerns, starting with a more traditional, spiritual-based tale starring River Phoenix, the 1993 film Silent Tongue. Before we get into it, just remember that subscribing to the channel will clear up your biliousness and rid you of the black dog. Let's get to it. We open on the Great Plains in 1873, where we swoop down upon the corpse of Albany Roe, old Talbot Roe's dead wife. We find him lurking nearby, grief-stricken, and piling up bird carcasses on her to keep the vultures off. We then transition to his father, Prescott, dropping in on a traveling vaudevillian show. We see the act is very jawbone-centric, as all the best ones are. His sighting causes some concern between the McCree father-son duo, as they suspect his return a harbinger of bad juju related to a prior business deal, but they are contractually obligated to take a break for an ad read from their snake oil sponsors. So Prescott takes that opportunity to circle around back and take a look at some old family photos while he waits. When Eamon arrives, they have a disturbingly close conversation in which Prescott explains the daughter he bought for his son has died whilst bearing a child. To assuage his son's psychotic grief, he was wondering if McCree could perhaps spare another. Eamon balks at the idea, but Prescott persists, pressing to figure out what it would take for him to walk away with McCree daughter today. Reeves, however, is alarmed and disgusted by this business, so they put off talk of selling flesh for another day. When we check back in with Talbot, we see him watching over his wife's corpse, talking nonsense and trying to protect her from the bad spirits. But she jumps up like, "Nah, I got this, bro," and she confirms she would love nothing more than to fly away in the bellies of the buzzards, and requires him to set her free, something he is too selfish to do. The next day finds the sideshows up and about, practicing to improve in their respective crafts, whether it be tapping or fingernail growing or whatever. Valeda heads to the river where Prescott swoops in for an old-fashioned daughter theft. He escorts her away in full view of the others, as if to slam his balls on the table in an open challenge. Meanwhile, Eamon has a dream about the time he first met his wife and forced her into marriage. Reeves wakes him up to alert him of the kidnapping, and they plan to give chase. At that point, Prescott has gotten far enough away to feel it safe to remove her sack and try to explain things to her in the hope she'll become comfortable with the idea of compulsory companionship. But it doesn't go as well as he had hoped. Elsewhere, Talbot still mourns.
If you could give me a sign.
Like when she explicitly told you what to do? That night, Albany returns, and they work through some of their relationship woes that really hinge around her hatred for him. She tries to convince him to go ahead and kill himself, but he can't, because he's still waiting for some sort of a sign. That night, Valeda circles back to find Prescott sleeping in a traditional fashion, but he was faking, and they log roll down the hill before he takes to pleading with her to help him save his son by acting as a stand-in for her dead sister. The promise of horses and gold, which would put her beyond the reach of her terrible father, is what ultimately seals the deal. That night, we see Eamon's run out of tonic and would prefer to head back, but he's unable to make it on his own, and Reeves is only willing to travel in one direction, so they carry on. Similarly, Prescott ends up with some spiritual knives in his back, and Valeda explains Albany is acting as a tool of vengeance on her mother's behalf, so he also insists they continue on. They arrive at camp in the morning, and despite not being a certified healthcare professional, Prescott urges her on to comfort Talbot and solve all of his problems via her natural womanly instincts. While he starts out wild as a beast, he eventually calms, and even accepts little snake meat from his new camp buddy. But our friend sends in the eagles to interrupt the respite, and she confers with her sister, insisting she burn the corpse after curing that crazy-ass white boy. On the other side of the valley, we find the elder McCree ranting about how poorly his silent wife has treated him, and even after he went through the trouble of making her his legitimate wife, so she wouldn't have to be embarrassed about how he forced himself on her. In his heightened state, he is overstimulated by the appearance of a troop of dog soldiers, causing him to take drastic and hasty measures, resulting in him being stuck on foot in the vast expanses of the plains as Reeves gallops off without him. In the night, Prescott tries to interject himself in the process, finding himself unable to leave things for others to do. He is visited by the spirit and tries to convince her to leave his son alone, but she thinks very little of him, as he is equally worthy of torment, having been the one to enslave her and all. So she frees the horses into camp, dragging Prescott along so she can mock them all at the same time for convenience. As she rolls through, she snatches at the body, causing it to fall at Prescott's feet. So he handles this business in his own way, press slamming the corpse into the fire. Then he moves in for a fatherly hug, cause there's been a lot of healing going on here today. Now released from her earthly prison, the sisters stare at each other from their preferred positions related to the fire. As the sun rises, we see the Kickapoo troop setting up for the day, including the gross, pasty fingernail guy, and they make preparations for replacing Eamon moving forward.
The fever of the Demon Prairie,
as he is elsewhere, being led along a path and losing his mind as he laments the treatment of his wife, who, as we come full circle, watches his forced march. And as the townsfolk roll in, the show goes on without him, as father and son make their way across the plains. Now for the end of video reminder that I have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Donations earn an uncensored review of Toby Hooper's Life Force, and the merchandise is a combination of logo apparel along with general horror-themed items. A huge thank you to my donators, heretofore memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. The Silent Tongue hits all the right notes for me as far as a Western goes, and I think it's a good example of spiritual horror. On some lists of horror Westerns, I've seen High Plains Drifter included, simply by virtue of the fact that Eastwood plays what is assumed to be a vengeful spirit of some type. But in this case, there's clearly no question at all about the supernatural aspect. If you enjoyed the video, I'd love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.